The Dream of May Tree by Bruce Hagen, copyright 2024. It was the afternoon of August 25th in Petaluma, California, USA. Ooh, ooh, ooh. It was no time for an owl to be awake. Ooh, ooh, ooh. May dropped her spoon into her applesauce, spinning in her seat to face the window. Nose on glass, she squinted at the hillside behind the back fence. "Grandma," she whispered sharply, "did you hear that owl?" Said her grandmother. Grandma, it's daytime." May unlatched the window, pushed it open wide, and listened. "Ooh, ooh, 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 ooh," came the call from up the hill. "Grandma, did you hear that? She's calling me." "May-chan, it's for you," the owl repeated, quite clearly this time. A mother quail and her dozen peepers scurried quietly across the patio, right under May's nose. Any other day, a quail family would have commanded her complete attention. Today, they might as well have been invisible. "Grandma, why would that owl be awake now? And how would she know my name?" May blinked at the bright summer sky, thinking. Then she decided. "Grandma, I'm going up the hill. Okay?" she called out as she pushed open the screen door, headed for the back gate. "No nap today? Later, okay?" Grandma smiled and nodded. "Be back for dinner. Your mother is making hot pot." May took short steps up the steep and well-worn path. She weaved her way through the tall grass stalks, their seed heads tapping her head as she passed by. Crispy gray thistles crunched beneath her sandals as she made straight for the fat, twisty oak tree halfway up the slope. May knew this tree as Greenbeard, the last of the giants. Greenbeard was extremely old, covered with whiskers of Spanish moss. Grandma said that long ago he was part of a forest covering the whole mountain. Today he stood alone. May had known Greenbeard only for a few years, but she could imagine what life he must have led. Now he's enjoying old age, relaxing and sunning himself as he leans back on his many arms and elbows. The animals loved him. He fed them acorns and bugs. He sheltered them from driving winter rain and blazing summer sun. If you could climb or fly, Greenbeard gave you a place in his arms to safely hide away, waiting for dinner. Daytime, it was a popular place for May and the red-tailed and white-tailed hunterbirds. At night, the owls. Greenbeard's front arms formed an arched doorway into the leafy rooms surrounding his huge trunk. As always, May came to this door with slow, careful steps, pausing for a deep breath before stepping inside. She loved this place like home. It was always shady and green, quiet and cool, even in the summer. Good smelling, like the soil in Grandma's garden. For years she had enjoyed her visits with Greenbeard, first with Gigi, then on her own. But recently, as again today, it made her strangely sad. Greenbeard was a coast live oak. He should always be wearing a coat of dark green leaves. But last summer those leaves began dropping, one by one, like a slow, dry rain. Now most of his leaves lay quiet on the ground. Those still clinging to their twigs were the color of ashes and dust. Grandma said Greenbeard did not like the warming climate. He had sudden oak sickness. SOS, like a call for help, Grandma said. Now May could hear that call, and she wondered, who would answer? "Hello, Mr. Greenbeard," May bowed, then approached him for a hug. Hugging Greenbeard wasn't easy. It was like hugging the side of a house, but she did it anyway. "Where are you hiding your owl today?" "Ooh, ooh, ooh," came the answer from very close by. Then a tiny acorn rattled down through the branches and tapped May on the top of her head. "Huh?" she said, looking up and as she did, another tiny acorn dropped directly on the tip of her tongue. She gasped and gulped. The acorn disappeared. Did it bounce into that gopher hole between her feet? Or did she swallow it? A twig snapped overhead. May watched the owl jump into flight, then flap silently west, just under the faint blue sliver of the moon. Where'd that acorn go? May remembered how Gigi teased her about swallowing watermelon seeds. You might grow a watermelon in your tummy. But May was smart about science. An oak tree could not grow in my tummy, she told herself. With the mysterious owl gone, and her being overdue for her nap, May bowed goodbye to Greenbeard, turned and started back down the hill. In the distance, Grandma with her green apron and orange sun hat looked like a giant poppy flower against the brown rows of garden soil. Poppies. Suddenly, a wave of sleep washed over her like a warm wind. Maybe I could have my nap here, she thought. She sat down on soft, dry grass and slipped off her sandals. Sure I could. She stretched and yawned like Hermione, her cat. Then she lay down and closed her eyes. But no, she remembered, I have my naps at home. May pulled herself up onto her bare feet, and as she stood up, the sleepy warmth was washed away by a cool whirlwind of sparkling energy. It swirled up from inside her, from her heels and toes to her fingers and nose. May opened her eyes wide as blooming sunflowers. All around her, everything glowed like the sun was shining on the world from the inside. Slowly, May stretched her arms. Beautiful live oak leaves there in my hands, she observed. No. Wait. Oak leaves glowing green, growing from my fingertips. Before May had time to think about this, she saw that her 3 arms were covered with a skin of scaly gray bark. What is going on? Then she remembered the acorn. May thought this should be scary, but she wasn't scared. Not at all. She felt wonderful. That acorn came from Greenbeard, her best friend. She looked for Grandma and her home. Wow, she could see forever. And there, down the hill, was her butter-colored house. There was Grandma in the garden. She looked up at May and waved with her weeder. May looked for Greenbeard. There he was, right beside her, but no longer gray. Green like before the SOS. And he was smiling, without even a face to smile with. Reassured of her safety, she smiled back. She was very curious about what would happen next. I'll learn what I learn and see what I see when I live the life of a live oak tree. The sun sank quickly into the fog wave that was spilling over the western hills, but not quickly for Maytree. Time slowed down. Minutes and hours and days became weeks and months and years. The tall grass grew taller and golden. The west wind blew it into waves that rolled below her. May was a dancer, so Maytree moved her arms with the breezes, swaying to the quiet, slow music. And each evening, when the wind grew still, her arms were pointing the tiniest bit more at the place where the wind had gone. The last full moon of summer rose and poured cool air down the quiet slope. It swirled around Maytree's legs, while her head and arms floated above, still bathing in afternoon heat. But the next morning she woke up with alarm. Her yellow house was gone. All the houses, gone. What is happening to me? My feet are cold. Then she laughed. During the night, a blanket of fog had been pulled across the valley from her knees to the slopes of Sonoma Mountain. Maytree explored her new senses. She saw deep into the steady eyes of the kites as they hovered above, searching for their next meal. She heard every singing bird for miles around, and she grew to understand their songs. They would say, "Watch out, danger," and "Come get some food," and "Will you be mine? Will you be mine?" Maytree soon had tree companions of all kinds, trees beyond counting. She loved these new neighbors like family. They were family. Maytree had a big appetite, but she was still growing up, and her leafy hands could not catch much sun food. Yet she was never hungry. Her neighbors cared for the children at their feet, and that included her. They shared food and water and medicine through their huge tangle of roots, with help from the tiny creatures who lived in that dark, moist world. She sensed the warning messages from the mother trees, preparing their defense against any attack. One spring morning, she felt a tickling on her leafy fingertips. She was alarmed to see some of her leaves wrapped with sticky white tents, and to feel the nibbling of tiny caterpillars. They quickly spread to cover all her leaves. "I'm doomed," she thought. But then the birds came. Not only were they happy to eat the bugs, but they looked familiar. These were the same birds who collected and planted her baby acorns. "I can live with this," she smiled to herself. Maytree had people friends too. In the autumn, they would collect some of her acorns to eat during the winter. Every few years, they would light small fires. These fires were scary at first, like the caterpillars, but she learned that the flames burned back the shrubs at her feet, the shrubs that were eating and drinking her food and water. Winter brought storm after storm after storm, flash floods of clouds racing over and down from the crest of the hill, wind whipping her arms wildly, rain soaking the soil around her feet. Nearby, the land was sliding, leaving gushing rust-red gashes in the green. Maytree gripped the earth tight with every one of her 1,000 toes. "Spring again, more birds this year," Maytree observed. "Nests, eggs, and babies," tickling her skin, picking the insects from her countless arms. No hurry now. Nothing to say, everything to hear. The scree of a hawk on an autumn morning, circling a rising fountain of air. Water gurgling through gopher tunnels after a spring downpour. The nightly chorus of crickets and frogs. On summer evenings, the click of bats, zigzagging for invisible bugs. And deep into a midwinter night, the hooting of the owls. No hurry now. Nowhere to go, everything to see. A May sunset, full of insects rising in clouds, golden light in their fluttering wings and in the drifting, shimmering spider webs. Maytree observed the slow circling of suns and moons, planets and comets, wondering, am I more tree or more girl? Could an oak tree smell the bay leaves, wet by the first November rain? Could a tree smell the perfume of tarweed in September heat? Could a girl smell a winter storm from 3 days away? Nothing passed by Maytree unnoticed. When the cloudburst rolled down the slope, she heard each raindrop slapping every blade of dry grass as the downpour raced towards her outstretched fingers and quenched the fire in her parched throat. She saw every bead of dew strung on the spider webs of late summer, and in each delicate bead the image of every other. She witnessed the hunting mountain lion and the death of the white-tailed deer, birth and death of the white-tailed deer. And she wondered, where are the baby oaks? When humans came with cows and weedy grasses, baby oaks would sprout up for a year or two, then disappear. Her forest family and friends grew old and gray. One by one, they lay down to slowly disappear into the grass, dissolving into tree food, with no babies to feed. Moss now hung low from her long, twisting branches. Maytree was stiff. She could no longer bend with the wind. A violent January storm knocked her down to one knee, but she kept her arms held high. Spring came, full of fast-growing grasses and hungry cows. Where are the baby oaks? The beetles, the fungus, and the winds were bringing May Tree back to a gentle and loving Mother Earth, a finger here, an arm there. Every autumn she sprinkled acorns at her feet, and yet no baby oaks. One quiet, moonless winter night, Mother Earth rumbled, then roared. She rose up, whipping the ground in waves. It snapped May Tree's old body into the sky, pulling her feet loose from the soil. She fell to the ground and was gently rocked before she was released into a mother's quiet embrace. Then, finally, May Tree settled down quietly for the long rest, beginning a dream of emerald green emerging from golden brown. May-chan, dinner! May opened her eyes and yawned and stretched her arms. Her mother stood just downhill, hands shielding her eyes against the setting sun. May got to her feet. Solid. She began to walk, steady, back home. But something held her back. Did she leave one root gripping the ground? May stopped, shook the sleep from her head. She turned around and looked down into the flattened grass where she had slept, a bed of wind-combed gold and something else. Mom, you didn't do this, did you? May pointed back at the ground. Her mom shook her head no. Two tiny bright green leaves poked through the grass where May had slept. It's a baby, she smiled. A baby oak. It's a May tree, said her mother. It was the first of many more. Thank you.